everyone. I'm so glad you're here today. We are going to start this session by talking about what is clay. Before we can actually make a beautiful piece of pottery, it's important to understand what clay actually is. Clay is a natural material that's found in the earth. It was formed thousands, even millions of years ago. Years of the rocks being broken down slowly through weathering and erosion, rainwater, everything kind of breaking down. Those tiny particles combined with minerals create smooth, moldable substance, which we now call clay. That clay comes together, we wedge it up and make pottery on the wheel. But what is actually inside the clay? The main sources of minerals in the clay are alumina and silica, along with small amounts of natural minerals that actually create the color content of the clay and the firing properties. Depending where the clay is mined, we can find red clay, brown clay, black clay, gray clay, and white clay. There's lots of colors, and there's even potters these days mixing colorants into their clay, which just adds a whole nother element of fun. When we work with clay, it's important to know that water content is so important. Clay is made up of 20 to 30% water weight and 70 to 80% consisting of the minerals and particles. The water coats the tiny minerals and particles in the clay, and that allows the particles to slide past each other and make the clay soft and malleable and flexible and easy to shape by the potter's wheel and by the potter's hands. As the clay dries, the water evaporates and goes through a few stages, which we will be talking about further. The particles move close together, causing that clay to shrink even more. Once the clay has dried, which this could take a week, maybe a month, maybe a few months, depending on the size and shape of the vessel that you make. Once that clay is dried, the clay is considered bone dry. And that looks a lot like this piece right here. All the particles have dried out, the piece has shrunk. And at this point, the next step is firing the piece of pottery in a potter's kiln. So we take the piece, fire it in the kiln, and once it's fired, it has undergone a permanent transformation. It becomes strong, durable, and ceramic. Then we go through a process of glazing the pottery. The first pottery firing is called the bisque firing. The second pottery firing is the glaze firing. So for the second firing, I'm going to take a piece of pottery and paint it with glaze, and then I'm going to fire it again. Glaze, which we'll talk about in future videos in much more depth, is essentially liquid glass that we're painting on the pottery and then firing it to a high temperature in the kiln, and it melts and covers the vessel, just like this lovely little coffee mug that I made here. This is a white stoneware clay body. The particles have come together, they have tightened up, which means the particles have vitrified. And now I can drink my water or my coffee out of my potter's mug, and it's functional and food safe. Not all clay bodies or glazes are food safe, so we will get into that a little bit more later. The majority of my work is. I like that people can actually use whatever I make, whether they're hanging a bowl on their kitchen wall for decoration and they take it off and put a vegetable tray on it or a charcuterie platter together and then put it back up on the wall later. I think that it's wonderful that it has the option of being used. That's just my personal belief in my clay works. As far as types of clay bodies, there's quite a few types of clay bodies that people like to use. Earthenware is one type of pottery that a lot of people use if they actually like to bake in their pottery. Stoneware is also wonderful for baking, and I know there's lots of great companies out there that sell stoneware, but you can also make your own. I love to bake dishes in pottery stoneware that I have made, and so do my students. And let me just tell you this real quickly. This is a fun little fact, but the cool thing is stoneware clay has all these little microscopic pores. And so it actually essentially breathes while you're baking your chicken or your brownies or whatever you're cooking. And since it's got those microscopic pores over the entire surface of the pan, it bakes evenly, unlike metal and glass. So you're going to get a wonderfully evenly baked cake or egg casserole or turkey if you bake in stoneware. One of my favorite things to use in my kitchen. And now you can make your own. In fact, I might need to do a module on stoneware baking dishes. That would be so much fun. Another kind of clay that I really like to use is porcelain. Porcelain is a very pure white clay body. People a lot of times see it as more sophisticated clay, I believe, for vases and glasses and such. And if you throw stoneware thin enough, some of the porcelain thin enough, some of the porcelain clay bodies are actually transparent where they're very thin. It's amazing. You can hold them up to light and see a little bit of light through like the carvings or the very thin parts. I like to use porcelain on some of my jewelry that I make, and also some of the vases that I make with like hand sculpted flowers and such. It's a little bit smoother to work with. I would say it's a little more challenging than stoneware. Porcelain doesn't have all of the grog, which is like a sand material, that the stoneware does. So when you're throwing it, it's a lot smoother, but it doesn't have as much strength as the stoneware does. So when you first start throwing, if you're a new thrower, I would probably start with stoneware or earthenware before you jump into porcelain. I will say though, once you conquer porcelain and can throw porcelain, it's pretty amazing. You can pretty much throw anything, in my opinion. That's what I've been told. But when you first throw pottery, porcelain pottery clay, it almost feels like cream cheese. Like it's kind of a running joke, like throwing with cream cheese amongst the pottery community. Some of you have probably heard that. There's a few stages of clay that I want to talk about as we finalize this module on clay and what clay actually is. The wet stage of clay. So the wet stage of clay is like when I pick up this clay, I buy it somewhere, or you dig it out of the earth, you got this nice, wet, yummy clay. Okay. This is the wet stage of clay. The leather hard stage is after I've thrown a cup on the potter's wheel or a bowl, or I've started a platter. The leather hard stage is when it has dried out a little bit. It's to the extent where you could still push your finger in the side of like a cup a little bit, but it's not sticky anymore. It doesn't have that sticky, tacky feeling. It's a great stage if you want to carve on your pottery or decorate. Sometimes it's really beneficial to wait to do your carving until the stage is at leather hard. The third stage is bone dry, which we just talked about. And bone dry is when the clay particles have dried up completely and they are ready to put in the kiln. Here's an example of what bone dry looks like here on this nice little plate that I made. And then the finished glazed pottery is the final step. The glazed pottery, there's so many options. I can't wait to get into glazing lessons with y'all. But the glazed pottery has that nice, beautiful glaze on the outside finish where the piece is finished. It's food safe if you use food safe products, and ready to use in your home. So those are the steps as far as the different stages of the clay body. Clay is supposed to be touched. It's supposed to be reshaped and experimented with. So we're going to get into the next video. We're going to be talking a little bit more on that. Can't wait to see you then.